Hey class, we're going to look at some subgenres again. Form criticism's value is that it identified subgenres, and actually the gospel writers actually collected their stories sometimes around those subgenres and organized their material that way and put them in the gospels in that format. Again, topically arranging. So we're going to look at some one subgenre called miracle stories. And again, these are collected and organized in Mark's Gospel altogether from 435 to chapter 543. So we have the storm, the calming of the storm, the casting out of the demons, the legion, the healing of the woman with the issue of blood, and Jairus' daughter. Now, those actually, the last two belong together because they happen on the west bank. And these two happen as he's going from the west bank to the east bank, so it's kind of that way. Now, these two are a literary sandwich, the last two, and we'll look at that sandwich and the theme of that in a few minutes. Please pause and read this story if you're not familiar with it. One of the things we notice about this is the geography. These winds coming down onto the Sea of Galilee, the Arbels mountains here, cliffs, and that would hit the water, and it would come up on the east side, and this whole thing gets stirred up. The entire lake gets 5 to 10 feet waves suddenly with these sudden strong winds. Now, these were seasoned fishermen, so they were afraid. You know something was really bad happening in that storm. Jesus is asleep. In this story, the language Jesus uses implies that storms are more than just physical storms, like the storms of life even. But here the word, he rebuked it and said, "Be still," is the same language he uses when he does exorcisms. This idea of picturing Jesus doing only what God in the Old Testament can do, that is controlling nature, is definitely something that pictures Jesus as being divine. And so the response to the disciples and their lack of faith and their fear was that what? Faith is more than just intellectual assent. It's not just knowing that, he's there to do something, but it was rather entrusting your entire life into the person's hands. And so that's what he was really rebuking them about. Again, the candor of Mark's gospel is brought out in the way that the disciples' faith is definitely not what it should be at this point. So in this story of this casting out of the legion of demons is showing his power over spiritual realm. So we saw his power over nature, over the natural physical realm that he created, and now he has power over the spiritual realm that he created. And so again, pause the video and read this story. It's chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. So where does this take place? It's taking place over here in Gergesa, but there's 3 different titles that are used for that, and we're going to talk about this. Remember that this river right here is the dividing point between the very Jewish west side over here, and on this side, it's the up to this river here, Yarmuk, is a semi-Jewish area. It did have one town in it that was very Jewish. It was Gamla, and we'll see that on a map in a minute. But the rest of this area is called the Decapolis. So in the New Testament, when you read about the Decapolis, this is the area, the 10 cities, Decapolis. Remember this, these 10 cities were giving their independence under Pompey in 63 BC. And so they were independent. Gadara was 6 miles away from the lake. Gerasa is 33 miles away from the lake. So we need to keep that in mind when we're reading this story. So was it the Gerasenes in Mark and Luke? Was it the Gadarenes in Matthew? In some manuscripts for Mark has Gergesenes. So which one is it? Again, the evangelical triangle from Capernaum to Chorazin to Bethsaida. This is it's called in geographical terms the evangelical triangle. Evangelical in the sense that they were very Jewish, right? And over here, here's Gamla. That's where Josephus was captured in 66 AD, by the way. He was the Jewish historian. They took him captive and took him to Rome and had him write a history of the Jews. So that's why we have the Antiquities. That's why we have the life and time. So all those kinds of writings, the 4 volumes of the history of the Jews. It's very important. And then what happened was Jesus was going from here to over here, probably to rest. But the storm blew him down right past this, down to Gergesa, right on the border where you go between the semi-Jewish to total Gentile territory. So I ask students sometimes, what was the first Gentile mission in the New Testament? And they'll say, well, Paul's first missionary journey. Nope. It was Jesus being pushed by a storm into Gentile territory. That was the first mission. So of mission and manuscript. So the exorcism reaffirms his power over demonic as well as anticipates the Gentile mission. It's the first account outside of Palestine. So the manuscripts have these different terms. The more likely is Notice the ge here, not Gera, but Gergesa. And it's the location of his century church. We'll look at that in a minute. Origen Eusebius said it was here. Mark's Gerasenon, a term that was very loosely used in Rome for all of the Decapolis. The better known city, Gerasa, is in the manuscripts of Mark and Luke. The better known city that became the better known city. Why? Because it became the administrative center for the Decapolis later on. So let's just take a look at this and see what we got here as to why this might happen. Now, just one thing, a footnote in Josephus about Gergadara, why Matthew might have used that, is because up in Syria, it would have been better known. And this is probably his audiences up there. The Syrian Jewish audience. We talked about that under authorship and destination of his gospel and so forth. But Josephus mentions it as having a Roman naval port there, that on coins of Gadara, that right there on the lake there was a Gerasa that had the naval shipping there. So anyway, Matthew preferred that for his audience, and that's the term that was used in his writings. So here's the geography. The general area is anywhere it could happen, but here's Matthew's Gadara, why it probably wasn't actually taking place here, just the better known city. Here there was a naval port, but the naval port was actually up in here. All of it's under it's gardened now. The water line was up here, across here in this area. And when you think about, when you think about how much the water line has gone down, more than 100 feet, some say or claim, between now and the first century now. Why? Because they've put a big, huge pipe, and they pipe this water all throughout Israel and Palestine. This is the city that was mentioned in Luke and Mark in the manuscripts, the original manuscripts. There are some manuscripts that have Gerasa, as we said, but this is the area. Now, why is this a 5th century church built here, saying it was the site? You go one step across on this path, and there's the tombs that are into the hillside, and we'll look at those. There's a closer picture of that I didn't put it in this lecture. But anyway, it's real. All of it would have happened here. This is where the demon would have been living, and there's all kinds of sites where this kind of thing could have happened. You see the natural line where this could have plunged over. Again, the water line would have been up here, and what would that look like? Well, if it was up here, then this could have been the site. Up here even could have been the site where it happened, but that is the more likely place. Now, why that critical issue? Why did I bring that in? Well, because a lot of students in classes normally that I have in class for this course ask that question, so I thought I'd throw it in for you. First mission to the Gentiles, though, is the important thing. When the demon-possessed man or men confronted Jesus when he arrived on the shore, they call him the Most High God, Son of the Most High God. That's an Old Testament Gentile term for the God of the Old Testament, God of Israel. And so the swear to me, that's adjuration formula. They're trying to get an upper hand on him. But they know that their torture is coming. They claim to be a legion so that they would put fear into Jesus. Now, that is not a proper name. We know that legion is a military organization title. There's legions, and under them cohorts, and under cohorts are centuries, and so forth. And a legion is ran by a legate. A cohort is run by the first praetorian, and the century is run by a centurion. So we have here them trying to put fear into Jesus. There is a fluctuation in the term between singular and plural. Why? Because of the collective singular. There's probably more than one man there, as Matthew's gospel has two, right? And why is that? Well, because demons like to possess people, then animals, then things and places, and demons are organized hierarchically, just like the angels, the good angels are have a hierarchy. The bad angels, or called demons now, are evil angels, have a hierarchy. So this is part of the organization that they have, and where you have one man, that's okay. But when you have more than one man possessed by a demon, then there's one going to be in charge. And so Mark and Luke emphasize the one in charge, and Matthew, Jewish audience, he likes the idea of two or more witnesses, every word's established, right? So the idea of a conversion, he's composed, sitting, clothed in his right mind. This picture of conversion is very important. The townspeople, though, economic means are what's important to them, so they reject Jesus. But when Jesus comes back to this region later in the Gospels, we find 3,000 people from the region coming to bless him and to receive him and to accept him. And why? Because of the testimony of this demon-possessed man that was healed. And so when he asked Jesus to go with him, to follow him across to the other side, Jesus said, "No, don't do that. Go and tell everybody what great things God has done for you." Then there's the literary sandwich, the woman with the issue of blood interrupting the story of Jairus. Now, why does that happen? And well, it's because they both have the same theme of uncleanness. Again, the uncleanness of her issue of her menstrual cycle. There's a whole Mishnah tractate on that one issue. Remember how important purity was to these people. Not only ceremonial purity, but purity. Why was that so important? The Pharisees taught that the purity of the temple and the purity of the table in the temple was to be the purity of your home and the purity of your table. And that's one of the reasons why on table fellowship, the Pharisees got so upset with Jesus, because he ate with what? Yeah, the common Amharites, the sinners and the publicans. My goodness, you got to keep purity, right? And so this is a big issue to them. And again, the story here is an anticipation of the purity emphasis actually in Mark chapter 7. So what's this thing about her touching the edge of the hem of his garment, the edge of his cloak? As Mark 6:56 emphasizes again, to touch even the edge of his cloak, all those who are gathered for healing. Well, touching the tassel of his prayer shawl. In the Numbers 15, the law required all Jews to put on the corners of their garments tassels. Why? To remind them of God and the law. And so in 150 BC, in the intertestamental period, the rabbi said, well, we allow you to wear a shawl with the 4 tassels so that you don't have to take and spend the money to put the tassels on all your clothing. Now, this shawl became known later as the prayer shawl, but in Jesus' day, it was just the shawl, right? So the rabbis, their Messiah tassels will have value by touching them. The rabbis taught that the Messiah's value will have value by touching them. They have the power to heal diseases. Now, you can forget this, have the power to forgive sins. After further research, I found that nowhere does it say in intertestamental literature, nowhere did the rabbis ever expect the Messiah to be able to forgive sins. So that's inaccurate right there. You might want to note that. But her faith in the promises of the Messiah, really, it was what healed her. It's her faith. We live now, but not yet. Why some people don't get healed? Why don't people get healed? I get that question all the time. I say, well, it's really simple. You know, in the first coming of Jesus, the kingdom of God was initiated, inaugurated. But in the second coming, it will be consummated. And in the consummation, then all the promises of the kingdom will be ours. But right now, we only have what Paul calls a foretaste, a down payment, which is the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is our down payment right now. But physical healing, sometimes that happens when in the Synoptic Gospels, faith is required for that to happen, for a miracle or a healing. You know, healings are just a subgenre of miracles, right? And so he would often ask them to do something to demonstrate their faith. Go do this, go do that. What do you say? What do you want me to do? To demonstrate their faith. But in John's gospel, sometimes God just does it. Jesus just does the miracle and doesn't ask them to do anything, doesn't require faith on their part. It's just God sovereignly doing it. John chapter 9. Who said that this man, that he was born lame? Well, you know, it was neither, not his parents, not him. It's so that the power of God can be demonstrated. And what was that all about? In John's gospel, he emphasizes that God heals by signs and wonders. Why? To engender faith in people, to bring about faith. These signs are written that you might believe, he says. And so that's a total difference between John's gospel and the synoptics. But it's the same thing today. Sometimes faith will bring about a healing, but sometimes it's like John's gospel. It's the sovereignty of God that's in control, and we're not healed now. Why? Because the kingdom isn't fully consummated. That was all free, by the way. Literary sandwich. The woman with the issue of blood, then. The thematic connection is the uncleanness. The unclean spirits, the clean, unclean pigs. Of course, the Gentiles had a co-op, all those little towns in that area where they would put their pigs together and have one person looking after them. And so it was the wealth, not of just one little village, but the wealth in an entire area that Jesus destroyed when he allowed the demons to go in and they drowned. And so that's why they didn't want him around. So he confronts this uncleanness on the east side. He confronts this uncleanness on the west side with these two stories: the woman who issued it, and of course, death is the ultimate uncleanness in the Old Testament. So I want you to be able to look at these and analyze them. Notice how that there is a build up into a climax, from inanimate to animate, to humans, to inanimate to spiritual realities, to physical human realities. And so the climactic healing, climactic miracle is Jesus' power over death. And you can look at the person's need, why they needed the healing, the reaction of how they reacted to the Lord, their faith that was involved, the recovery that came, the results of the recovery, and who Christ is as a result of looking at him over each of these areas.